In 1962, deep inside a restricted facility near Moscow, Soviet engineers were sketching a spacecraft that could rewrite the future of space travel. It was sleek, compact, and unlike anything the Americans had seen. Its name was simple, the LK-1. But in those four letters hid the Soviet Union's first true plan to send humans around the moon. The world knows Apollo. Few remember this, because the LK-1 never flew. Its story was buried, not by failure alone, but by politics, secrecy, and the deadly competition within the Soviet space empire itself. The Cold War had pushed two nations into the sky. By 1961, the Soviets had stunned the planet. First satellite, first man in orbit, first woman in space. But the Americans were regrouping fast, and Kennedy's speech to land a man on the moon before the decade's end turned the rivalry into an open race. The Soviet leadership wanted a victory, quickly. They didn't need to land on the moon yet. They just had to beat America there. A flyby mission would do. Send a man around the moon, show him Earth from lunar distance, bring him home alive. That alone would humiliate Washington. The order went to Vladimir Shalomi, a rising star in Soviet rocketry, brilliant, ambitious, and arrogant enough to challenge even Korolev, the chief designer who had built Sputnik and Vostok. Shalomi's design bureau OKB-52 received the official command to design the spacecraft that could carry out the flyby, the LK-1. It would ride on a new rocket, the UR-500, later known as the Proton. Unlike Korolev's designs, Shalomi's system was military at its core, compact, modular, and designed for quick mass production. He believed that the Soviet future in space should serve the armed forces first. The LK-1 looked like a conical re-entry capsule, smaller than America's Apollo, but large enough for two cosmonauts. It had a pressurized cabin, life support for a week, and a small service module for propulsion and power. On the front sat a spherical airlock, unique for its time, allowing the crew to transfer or perform repairs without depressurizing the entire cabin. Its systems were crude but effective. Inside, there were no digital computers, no touchscreen panels, just dials, analog gauges, and switches labeled in the stark Cyrillic. Everything was designed to survive vacuum, radiation, and re-entry heat, with redundancy that came from simplicity. Shalomi promised the government that the first flight could be ready by 1967, timed perfectly for the 50th anniversary of the October Revolution. It was bold, patriotic, and politically irresistible, but the LK-1 faced enemies from the start. Korolev, who led the rival OKB-1 bureau, saw Shalomi's design as a threat. He believed his own Soyuz system was superior, capable of doing not just a flyby, but a full lunar landing. To him, LK-1 was a waste, a distraction that would divide resources and slow down progress toward the real goal, walking on the moon. The Soviet leadership was torn. Nikita Khrushchev liked Shalomi. His rocket team was personally loyal to him, and his proposals sounded aggressive and modern. So in 1963, the LK-1 was officially approved. Korolev was furious but powerless to stop it. Then history shifted overnight. In October 1964, Khrushchev was overthrown. Shalomi lost his patron. Korolev immediately regained control of the Soviet space program, and the LK-1 fell into limbo. Funding was cut. Blueprints were locked away. Shalomi's engineers, once promised glory, now sat idle, waiting for orders that never came. For a brief moment, the dream flickered again. In 1965, a joint version was proposed. Korolev's N-1 rocket combined with Shalomi's capsule. But the marriage of rival designs failed. Each bureau guarded its secrets. Nothing fit together. By 1966, the Soviet Union had chosen Korolev's path. The Soyuz-based L-1 system, also aimed at lunar flyby. Shalomi's LK-1 was officially canceled, without a single test flight. Most prototypes were dismantled. The few surviving parts were stored and forgotten in factory warehouses where dust covered them for decades. Yet the LK-1's influence didn't completely vanish. Its rocket, the UR-500, evolved into the Proton, one of the most reliable and long-serving launchers in history, still flying today. In a strange twist, the failure of the LK-1 helped give birth to one of spaceflight's most enduring engines. The secrecy around the program lasted until the 1990s. Only after the fall of the Soviet Union did documents emerge, faded blueprints, grainy test photos, and a handful of surviving engineers who told their stories. They described a machine that could have changed the race, a spacecraft capable of flying a crew to the moon 2 years before Apollo 8. But inside the Soviet system, personal rivalry mattered more than progress. Chelomey and Korolev's feud crippled any chance of unity. Two geniuses, two visions, and a government that encouraged them to compete rather than collaborate. The LK-1 became a symbol of that wasted brilliance. In theory, it could have worked. With a powerful enough proton rocket, the trajectory would swing around the moon and return to Earth in about 7 days. The capsule's re-entry shield was designed to withstand speeds of up to 11 kilometers per second, one of the first ever built for lunar re-entry conditions. Inside the mock-ups, engineers tested life support systems, radio equipment, and emergency protocols. They even simulated the flight path on early analog computers, calculating orbital burns by hand when the machines failed. Everything was being prepared for a launch that never came. In Western archives, the LK-1 was nearly unknown. American intelligence only learned fragments that the Soviets might attempt a lunar flyby before Apollo 8. That rumor alone pushed NASA to accelerate its schedule, risking Apollo 8's historic manned lunar orbit mission months earlier than planned. In a sense, the LK-1, though it never launched, indirectly shaped Apollo's timeline. The men who worked on the LK-1 rarely spoke of it afterward. Many moved to other projects, the Almaz space station, the Proton program, or interplanetary probes. Some left engineering entirely. Their creation had vanished, their achievement erased. Today, only a few photos remain. A half-finished hull, a mock-up capsule in a dimly lit factory, a set of drawings with faded ink. These fragments tell the story of a spacecraft that was ready for glory, but doomed by rivalry. Imagine what might have happened if it had flown. A Soviet cosmonaut circling the moon in 1967, 2 full years before Apollo 8. The world waking up to a red flag over lunar orbit. The space race might have taken a very different path. Instead, it ended quietly, in paperwork and silence. The LK-1 became one more ghost in the long corridor of forgotten dreams. For decades, its name was almost never spoken. Even among historians, it was overshadowed by its successor. The Zond missions, which used modified Soyuz capsules to attempt lunar flybys in 1968 and 1969. A few of those Zond capsules succeeded in unmanned tests, returning safely from lunar distance. They were the final echoes of what LK-1 had once been, but the difference was clear. Zond was Korolev's vision. LK-1 was Chelomey's. And in the Soviet Union, only one designer could win. What remains today is more than just a footnote. It's a reminder of what secrecy, pride, and politics can destroy. The LK-1 was technically feasible, scientifically valuable, and years ahead of its time. But it was built in a system that valued rivalry over cooperation. When you look at those black and white photos, the metal panels, the test stands, the engineers in their worn uniforms, you're not just seeing a spacecraft. You're seeing the cost of ambition trapped inside politics. Every rivet on that capsule told a story of hope. Every unfinished component was a step toward a dream that was quietly erased from the record. The LK-1 could have been the first human voyage to the moon. Instead, it became a symbol of what might have been. And so, like many Soviet secrets, it slipped into darkness. A spacecraft that never flew, a name never spoken in triumph, a dream lost between the stars and the silence of history.